Hello, hello. Welcome in, Arizona Cardinals fans. It's the Redbird Reboot. I'm Blake Murphy. You can talk to me on Twitter at BlakeMurphy7. We got Marcos over there who's typing away at some of his notes for the most part, at least. We've been getting ready to have a good show for you on this Saturday. Marcos, how are you doing today? Are you stuffed for the most part after everyone's Thanksgiving holiday? I know a lot of people spent time working over the week, so props to everyone who's been keeping things going. Props to the NFL teams. It always seems tough to be able to play on Thanksgiving away from your family, even having to practice on a holiday such as that. But it's a good day for turkey, football, and family and everything that comes between.
It's always the same, two teams that play. It's always the Lions and the Cowboys. It's almost a tradition to just see the Cowboys play against whoever they're playing against, and it doesn't really matter who it is because, the people who make up the schedule are just like, oh, that's Thanksgiving goes to the Cowboys. And I don't remember any time that the Cardinals played on Thanksgiving except for, I think it was maybe 12, 13 years ago when they played the Eagles and got trounced. That was the only time I remember, but I did spend a really good Thanksgiving. I hope you did as well. I ate obviously as much as everybody else does during Thanksgiving, and it was also my son's birthday. So it was his birthday
Yeah.
on Thanksgiving. He turned 4, so that was awesome. That was real special.
Excellent. Yeah, no, that's always great. Happy birthday, at least, your son. So let's shift gears now. Talk at least about some of what we've seen with this Arizona Cardinals team. We have the injury report that we can be able to pull up here, and let me just kind of put this out there ahead of time just to warn you. It's not very pretty for the Arizona Cardinals. Obviously, we have the likes of Lucky Fotu and Kaiser White. Kaiser obviously being the impact starter, going to injured reserve. You also are seeing the Cardinals have Antonio Hamilton, who obviously was injured late in the game. But there's a few more Cardinals who are hurting as well. So we already have Michael Wilson, at least, has been ruled out for the game. Didn't practice all rest of this week. A couple other players are limited. The biggest names that are outlying are Marquise Brown, who was limited in practice on Wednesday with a heel injury, and then did not practice for 2 days in a row, Thursday and Friday. He's officially questionable. It seems as though he may have either had a setback or suffered a heel injury in practice. Meanwhile, Amari DiMercado is limited in practice, but is practicing again. The Cardinals have missed him running the football, I know, the last few games. And you also have Jonathan Ledbetter, one of their better pass rusher and run defenders, is listed as questionable. And at wide receiver, Zach Pascal has been limited all week. I don't know if he's going to suit up for the Cardinals this week or not. So you're talking about 3 wide receivers being down. Meanwhile, on the other side, as you can see for the game status, pretty much most of the players for the Los Angeles Rams who have not been practicing for a while or had injury concerns coming into the week, notably Cooper Kupp had an ankle sprain in last week's game. He was limited on Thursday, practiced in full, along with Puka Nacua. And Kyron Williams, the running back who had 170 plus yards rushing against the Cardinals last game. That was the Cardinals came out knowing the Rams like to throw it. They mostly held the Rams in check with Cooper Kupp. And then second half, Rams just ran it up the middle on Arizona to a victory. And Marcos, this is one of those places where normally I think you would still feel that if you could get Hollywood out there, seeing what happened last week with Arizona, they lost some starters, but you're hoping that this defense can step up against maybe a banged up Rams team. Unfortunately, there is another set of news that did pop up just earlier today, and that would be that Jalen Thompson, the Cardinals' standout safety, is likewise questionable as well. He apparently has a back issue, according to Darren Urban, aka Cards Chatter. You can at least be able to see that that really puts them into a rough spot because he's one of the reasons why when Arizona got him back and Buda Baker back, you're able to see just how much their defense relied on him. And Marcos, if Jalen Thompson and Hollywood Brown end up missing this game, that's going to make it a very difficult go for the Cardinals, even if you are at home, because as we all know, you play Matthew Stafford, you play Cooper Kupp, you play Aaron Donald. It's like the Kyler, DeAndre Hopkins, J.J. Watt type of trinity there that the Cardinals had back in 2021. You don't lose a lot of games with that combo playing, and to do it without Jalen Thompson and probably, maybe, possibly, we'll have to see at this point, Hollywood Brown. That just has to make Cardinals fans feel kind of poorly heading into this game. Or do you think that this is something that we could be seeing a Cardinals team maybe a bit more competitive than people are thinking.
Yeah, I think the loss of Thompson, I would say, is very integral in this game because everybody knows the game plan. We talked about this off air. Like these NFC West teams, just they have good like we all know that they run a like what would I what would we be able to call it? Like not a West Coast offense. It's a similar type of offense that we're running right now, like a zone type of scheme, whether it's outside zone with Kyle Shanahan or with the Rams or what's going on with the we all know that they they base everything off the run with the Seahawks, especially with how they've been successful. Just that's the reason why they always employ or draft like running backs high or at least have the special type of running backs. I mean, we have
Yep.
three, starting running backs that like just can throw 150 on the Cardinals and at times have. So they kind of like stop playing around. They say to themselves, you know what? If we're not pulling away from the Cardinals, we're just going to turn around and start handing the ball off. And that was the one bugaboo that the Cardinals have not been able to solve for it seems like a decade now. They can't seem to stop the run. They can't seem to want to put any type of like invest in anything that has to do with like remotely trying to stop the run or trying to like help that interior, like interior defensive line position where you have this big body that could either steal a gap or you can have like him be able to like command the double teams consistently. You need two of those bodies at the very least over the middle so that teams can stop trying to run the ball up the middle when it comes to the their run scheme. And it's like the Cardinals never ever try to emphasize that. You also obviously need linebackers to step up to fill in for those gaps that the defensive linemen they cannot account for. But it just never seems to be the case where the Cardinals either try to implement a scheme that helps to stop the run or try to implement players that can be good against the run. And funny enough, our best run defenders are always the safeties that come down from the third level, either filling in for gaps that like linebackers are leaving wide
Right.
open or just not implementing that, a gap scheme, because that's not what happened with Vance Joseph. We didn't have a gap scheme. It was just blitzing on the way to the quarterback or blitzing on the way to the ball. Whereas like a normal gap scheme, you have an assignment, of course. You have this person has that gap, this person has that gap. If it's an obvious run play, then everybody has their assignment. So to me, I think that's going to be integral. As far as like the offensive side, I've been like critical about like Hollywood Brown, but we are getting thin at the wide receiver position, so that's not going to be ideal, especially going into a game where like if we're already down bodies and we have the same typecast of like wide receiver 5'10", small body and whatnot. There's only so much you can do in like a offensive scheme when it comes to that.
Right. No, and that's something at least that this is, you said, this is now with the Cardinals moving away from some of the gap blocking scheme that we saw with Cliff Kingsbury, moving away from more of that power scheme that Bruce Arians had, where essentially I would just kind of run the ball up the middle, get really good blocking guards. They wouldn't have as much as far as with bootlegs. You'd kind of have traditional drop back system. Quarterback has to move up in the pocket. Now we're just totally with what is the main trend in the NFL, which is zone blocking, and then trying to force the defense to flow to one side, having a good running back who can read the defense, whether to cut it outside, cut it up inside. That's kind of that outside zone play. And then there's a bootleg that runs off of that, of course, which can lead to easier types of completions for the quarterback, some half field reads. These are all things that we know of and have seen. And part of what's interesting is that Shanahan and McVay have kind of run it to perfection against Arizona. We've seen in the past how it was a really poor fit with Vance Joseph's scheme being very aggressive. We would see guys like, Marcus Golden, Chandler Jones, who were great pass rushers and pretty solid edge defenders overall, would lose contain and just wouldn't really be able to do as much in the run game against that outside zone. And to see the Cardinals now be adopting a pretty dominant version of this for the most part, they're top 10 in the NFL in rushing. It's kind of exciting to see that we're at least in a spot where we can now counterpunch in some ways on offense. The hardest thing, of course, is going to be on the defensive side because right now this is almost like I think there's a meme that's travel around a little bit, where essentially it ends up coming from a YouTube video where it talks about a coughing baby, and then it has, I think, a hydrogen bomb or something on the other end, which is the idea of it's like a David and Goliath, where it's like it's not even close. And in some ways, it kind of feels like that this Rams offense coming in fully healthy against a Cardinals defense that has lost some of these players. Talent wise, I think we've seen that the Cardinals have been able to kind of scrap and scrape to keep in games. And a lot of that, I think we credit for not just that team then of not giving up, of not quitting, is very well a lot of Cardinals fans, I think, would probably be fine if the Cardinals were to throw in the towel on this season, take that number 2 pick and walk away home. But the coaching has also done a very good job of having good game plans coming out. Last time the Cardinals played the Rams, it actually ended up being a really solid first half for the Cardinals overall. They were able to get some pressure on Matthew Stafford, and they were able to essentially kind of keep the game somewhat close in the first half up until the very end. When the Rams were able to pull away, you ended up having, I think it was in the first half, it was, how many points was it? I believe that in the first half, it was about 17 points, I think it was, for 6. No, it was 9-6, that's right, because the last play of the game was not a touchdown, it was a field goal. So you essentially had the lead ending the first half, with Arizona kind of gave the Rams their best shot as far as being able to get a few field goals, weren't able to punch it in. But in the second half, the Rams are just able to make a lot of rushing plays, and then we're able to get play action passes off of just kind of handing the ball off to Kyren Williams. Marcos, we talked a little bit about how we think the Cardinals and Rams could scheme for this game. How do you think the Cardinals should go out and attack this Rams team offensively and defensively?
Well, offensively, we have to try to get that. This is going to be interesting to see what the snaps are going to look like, especially with the splits that I've been keeping track of with under center and shotgun. So I think, there's just no other alternative to this situation other than trying to run the ball from under center. At the very least, set up a healthy amount of a healthy count of under center runs and not too much from shotgun. They've seen that scheme before. They've already know what those looks are, and how to defend those. You got to throw like a wrench in their game plan. You got to try to throw something different to them. You have to give them a different type of formation, because if you keep giving them the same type of look, especially coming from the same type of quarterback, they're already going to teach their defensive linemen and their edge rushers to stay disciplined and not lose contain when he's either not handing the ball off and making a soft play action instead of a hard play action from under center. They already know what to expect. Which way is his escape route? How do we make sure that he's not, escaping the pocket while keeping the wide receivers covered at the back end? And with a guy like Aaron Donald as well, you already know it's hard to be able to go to that same direction that he's being blocked at, not because he's gonna catch up and try to sack Kyler Murray, but because his offensive linemen are gonna have a hard time trying to make sure that this guy doesn't get to the backfield. So in doing so, they're probably gonna do whatever they can to protect their quarterback, and part of that is holding. And that happens if Kyler Murray escapes the same direction as an Aaron Donald. His offensive lineman is going to be put in a position where they either try to buy him that extra second by holding. We all know that refs don't always see every single call. That's the reason why offensive linemen continue to do it. But what if that does happen? That's a drive killer in most instances, and that's what they are trying to bait themselves on. So I really hope that they implement more under center run type of plays. And if there is any time where that increase needs to happen, it has to be against the Los Angeles Rams. That way, it's funny that that could possibly protect Kyler Murray better, but it's true, because then he would have a better ability to be in a pocket where his offensive lineman can go ahead and make that, go ahead and give him that shell of a pocket that we see when we see these quarterbacks go from under center, whether they're faking off the handoff or they're just taking a 3-step drop. They're in a position where their offensive linemen don't have to kick out so far out to be able to protect their quarterback. And on defense, it's just we know it for years now. They have to figure out a way how to be able to stop these run plays and the running backs as well. It's been too long that we see these running backs just have their way with the Cardinals, and we know that's going to be difficult already with Jalen Thompson out, but that's also going to be difficult in the back end coverage wise. And I just don't understand what's going on with Keitrell, why he's been like not getting any snaps. Marco Wilson struggling towards the outside. Garrett Williams is at least looking decent, and we don't have much help when it comes to the coverage side when we have to defend Cooper Kupp and Puka Nakua. So it's a tall task and it's almost impossible, but it really is going to come down to what the defense can do to allow the offense to be able to execute the entire playbook. And the offense needs to, throw a curveball. You're mute.
Thanks. I was looking at my screen over here and seeing one thing that's different from last time's game is we do have James Conner back as far as the Arizona Cardinals are concerned. He was missing in the last game, and Josh Dobbs was the leading rusher, unfortunately. He at least has had a relatively solid season for the most part since coming back in November. He's averaging almost 5 yards a carry. He hasn't had the same long breakaway touchdowns that he did previously. His longest gain so far has been 14 yards. Of course, the Cardinals have only played 2 games essentially with him back for the most part, but he's at least gone through and is about 500 yards or so, is getting 5.1 yards per carry. If he ends up continuing with how he averages, he'll be close to, maybe he won't hit, but he'll be close to 1,000 yards for the season. He's on pace for about 771, but Cardinals are going to be in a unique spot for the most part, looking at the last few games, because they are going to be, at least, I think in a lot of different ways, trying to be able to keep Kyler in a balanced offense. And I could see that being a place where when Michael Carter is able to kind of work through the team, that they're able to at least use their running game a bit more effectively, because right now it's been feast or famine as far as with James Conner, with Amari DiMercado out. I think that's one of the best ways to help with Aaron Donald is he can be very good at stopping the run, but being able to have an effective run game where he's not able just to line up on 3rd and 13 and just beat 2 guys to get to the quarterback. That is something that I think that the Cardinals, like you said, should use. It'll just be interesting to see if Kyler will get to use his legs this year. When you look at Kyler Murray and how his splits have been against the Rams specifically, and I'll pull this up here at least on our screen for those of you watching on video. So Kyler, he's played 7 games against the Rams, and he's got a 1-6 record. Cardinals have not beaten the Rams very much in the post-Bruce Arians era, because a lot of teams have not beaten the Sean McVay Rams since he's taken over for that team. He's completed still 63% of his passages, all about 1,700 yards. He has 7 passing touchdowns, but 6 interceptions. Quarterback rating of only 80. He's taken 20 sacks against the Rams. So that's 7 games and 20 sacks. You're talking about he's taking almost 3 sacks a game, which just shows the impact of not just Aaron Donald, but the Rams as well. He has run for about 154 yards against the Rams in those 7 games on 28 carries. And about 5.5 or so average. So it's not like he's running for like about 14, 15 yards on some of those scramble drills. And he has lost 3 fumbled 6 times fully against him. I remember that was one of the first fumbles he actually lost all season as a rookie, was against the Los Angeles Rams. He had set a record for like the most snaps without a fumble, and of course goes into the last game of the season and ball gets fumbled at least while he's back there in the pocket. Because one of the things I think what comes to when evaluating Kyler Murray is you want to be able to know a combination of not just is he the guy for the future for the Arizona Cardinals, and you can feel like that box is checked at quarterback, and you can move forward, build some talent around him. Does anything as far as Kyler and having bad games against the Rams, against Aaron Donald, does that any cause for concern, do you think, with Cardinals fans? Because, like, we can talk about how every quarterback seems like they have a team that's a bugaboo against them. Like Russell Wilson and the Broncos had never beaten Patrick Mahomes before this season, as far as it goes. I think maybe the Seahawks might have beaten the Chiefs at one point, but I'll have to double check on that. Either way, it was just Patrick Mahomes beats the Broncos. It's what he did. Cardinals at least have only gotten 1 win with Kyler. Do you feel like Kyler needs to show up against this Rams team, like be able to play good, not take a lot of sacks or throw picks, stay healthy? Is that going to be something that should be used as a deciding factor with him moving forward as far as evaluating his performance?
Well, like I was paying attention to those splits, and it was very interesting to see that like the third down, like completion and numbers and yardage and everything, It's like first down, he's fine. He's at 71% completion rating. That could be because, like, first down is usually sometimes more of a obvious passing down to like the sideline or whatnot. So that helps his completion, but his yardage is up there as well. And then it just comes down by down bases. So third down is where he's really struggling with them. But that's because they know, I believe they're the ones who set the blueprint on how to defend Kyler Murray. That's what I would always mention about like past years when people would talk about like, hey, they know how to defend a Cliff Kingsbury offense. I'm like, well, they also know how to defend a Kyler Murray like quarterback, because when you game plan for players as well. Like if you're going up against a Justin Herbert, like you have a different type of game plan to try to stop him, because you see what his tendencies are on film and you see what he favors, what he likes, who he likes to throw to, what kind of plays does he do, does he audible into in certain situations. So the same thing goes with Kyler Murray, because they've known Kyler Murray for literally almost, I mean, for his entire career, this coaching staff, with the exception of Brandon Staley moving on, this defensive unit knows like, hey, this is what we got to do with him. This is what we have to do as far as containing them. We're going to vacate the middle of the field, and that is one thing that they will give him. They will try to bait him to throw over the middle of the field because they want him to try to beat them over the middle. But for the most part, they will allocate the resources out of that middle part and have like a middle field open type of scheme for the most part to try to take away those throws on the outside so that he doesn't beat him out the outside. Not that he has much to work with on the outside either way. And you're right about what you mentioned about it. Trey McBride is going to be the key to try to beat the Rams, especially getting the ball moving on offense with either James Conner, Trey McBride stepping up, or both of them stepping up. They're going to have to be his best allies in this game, and he's going to really have to like rely on them to have not only the game that we expect for them to have, but to be able to like help him move the ball forward, especially Trey McBride knowing how to adjust and catch balls. And I mean, he's a special talent. So Kyler Murray, it's not like I'm not sure what the wording would be, but it is a tall task and he does have his work cut out for him. So if there's any time where you say to yourself, hey, we paid this guy that money, he is our franchise quarterback, this is why you do that. It's really going to have to come down on where he's going to have not only his like, he's going to have to rely on those players heavily, but he's also going to have to step up as well himself, because if the defense like doesn't give him any help, unfortunately, it's going to be up to him to try to keep the ball away from their offense and scheme ways on how to defeat their defense in a way where they attack the middle of the field and they run from under center and just keep attacking that middle part, get their defensive linemen tired enough to have them have to rotate. And then, it just comes down to like cohesiveness after that. How can they keep this offense going and hopefully keep the defense off the field long enough for them to be able to rest? And on defense, Nick Ross has to call like a beauty of a game.
No, I totally agree. And that's where I think it's super, super important to be able to take advantage of mistakes that are made. Because with watching the Rams this year, they are a flawed team ultimately. This is not a team that is dominant or top 10 in offense. This is not a team that's even dominant in defense. There's a ton of young players. Now, what they do have is they've got Matthew Stafford. They have Puka Nacua, who's made up for a lot of absences by Cooper Kupp to be able to keep their passing game going. But a lot of it is short routes, check downs. They've been kind of decimated by injuries in a lot of ways, and they were able to keep rolling and kind of stay in the playoff mix just because of some of those young guys stepping up, and of course, Aaron Donald on the other side. And that's been kind of, if I had to pick one nemesis for Kyler Murray the entire time he's been in the league, it's been Aaron Donald. He didn't get hurt necessarily on Aaron Donald's pass rush in the 2020 playoff game, but we've just seen him kind of chase him around in circles. And you can take a look at how Kyler, a lot of his career, at least as far as for the number of splits, is spent with a lot of times being in third and long, because they've had playing in the NFC West with good defensive lines. A lot of times that means you can't establish a run game. And it's been up to Kyler to have to either run around to make a play or, in some cases, like we've seen in the past, not have a very high yards per attempt. So he's not pushing the ball downfield versus having to get the ball out quick, hit the checkdowns, because guys are just there in the backfield. I think what you'll want to see, at least from what I would say with the Cardinals this week, is I think that what you should do is You need to be able, like you said, rely some on James Conner. I would move Trey McBride around. If you have to line him up outside to get some size, outside even, free up Rondale Moore and Greg Dortch in the middle of the field. Maybe even you get Hollywood to kind of come down into the slot. Rams have given up a lot of yards to slot guys this year. And their team is one that has made mistakes. They almost gave the game away to the Seattle Seahawks this last week. It took Seattle missing a field goal and Geno Smith being injured with his throwing elbow coming out of the game to be able to kind of cement the Rams being able to make a comeback. And even then, Geno, once he comes back in with an elbow injury, drives the team down the field and puts them in position. So I don't think that this is an unwinnable game. I just think that, like you said, it's a game that you're going to have to play every game close if you're the Cardinals. I don't know if this has to be a you can't stop the Texans without 3 turnovers type of game like we saw last week. But I do feel like this is a game where what the offense can't do is make mistakes or give up the big play or take a big sack where you're in kind of good field position or in field goal range and suddenly you're sacked, you're falling out of it. And it's also a game where you're probably going to want to take points versus last week. I think they had a hard time feeling like they could stop the Houston Texans. They went for it a few times on 4th down. They had confidence in Kyler. This week, I think if you can play more of this field position game, try to make sure that you're not giving up gashes in the run game up the middle. Make sure you're at least playing discipline and can tackle guys like Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua who are beat up. That's, I think, your bread and butter because this is a Rams team that only averages about 20 points a game. And with the Cardinals, they've averaged, I think, at least with Kyler back, about 21 or so points a game. Obviously, season-wide, you're a lot lower just because of the Josh Dobbs experience. But the last few games, we've seen the Rams be able to kind of pick up those point totals a little bit. It's just a place, at least, Marcos, where looking at this game, you feel like you would love to see Arizona get another win for the home crowd. But I think in this game, what you're really looking for is you may not end up with a win at the end of the day, but if you can see growth, another continued positive upswing for Kyler Murray, and if the Cardinals are in position at the end of the game to get a game-winning drive and maybe kick a field goal and get that win, that may end up being just exactly the bread and butter that this team would need, especially for fans, because that is a huge bugaboo to have to get off of your back when you're 1-6 in your career against a team that, to be frank, is kind of in the middle of a reset. Not at the quarterback spot, it seems like, but the rest of their team, for the most part, they've been kind of clawing and hanging on to playoff hopes and dreams for dear life.
The narrative has to be that, like, we have to say after this game, basically, that it was the defense's fault in order for us to say, like, hey, we're moving forward. Because then we can say, hey, Kyler Murray did all that he could. And because of the fact that we still have the same struggles every single year with stopping the run and not allowing these teams to just say, okay, it's serious time. We're just not going to play around with you guys anymore. We know you guys can't stop the run. That's what we're going to do. We're going to keep your offense on the bench and burn a ton of clock, have your quarterback frustrated on the sidelines when your defense can't get off the field, which rightfully so. He should have been pissed off all those games at the defense and the defensive coordinator for not scheming on how to stop the run, because that's just him sitting on the sidelines watching his team give up either points, time, or whatnot. And then when he gets back on the field, he has to either orchestrate something to either get a tie or, like, take the lead or just try to cut the lead and whatnot. And that's just not a place you want to be as a quarterback. So that has to be the narrative in order for us to be able to say, okay, well, at least we saw something different. We saw a change of gameplay. We saw different comfort levels from Kyler Murray. He's being used more under center, so we know he's getting more comfortable with being able to make those calls from under center and getting the timing down. Because remember, we saw a bunch of snaps where we had the tight end loop around the quarterback, so that takes time and practice, obviously, for that to be able to be successful. And they need to stop going with this whole idea that so the old way or the old idea was during games against the Rams, and the majority of the games against the Rams, because they didn't have the talent to be able to defend someone like Aaron Donald or those interior defensive linemen from being able to get to the backfield and make Kyler Murray uncomfortable. They used to call these type of protections called jump sets. So that's just basically, hey, our offensive linemen are going to be tasked with getting out on the defensive lineman as soon as possible with their arms fully extended. The reason why is because you want to try to give space in the pocket, because your quarterback, the more space he has to between him and the offensive lineman and the defensive lineman, the better he has vision wise to be able to like either see anything going over the middle or also just getting rid of the ball on the sideline. So the game plan right there is just to try to get the ball out as quick as possible, whether it's to the sideline or over the middle. That's your task. If your quarterback doesn't get rid of the ball at that point, he's essentially screwed, because the offensive line already went ahead and executed a jump set. They're not anchored down. They're not in a position where they can move, either unlock their hips to move one direction or another, because you're asking them to get on the defensive lineman, and at that point, the defensive lineman, after being pushed back, they're going to respond with either a swim move or just to get around, and the offensive lineman being that out there is just kind of exposing them. But that's the reason why that protection call only affords you a couple of seconds. It's like,
Yeah.
hey, the first second that the ball needs to come out, because they're gonna come for you, and that's what they would do just to try to mitigate the pass rush, because that's how dominant it was.
No, absolutely. Let's go and kind of shift at least a little bit of the focus now. Talk about a few predictions. We've already talked at least about Aaron Donald. Let's go ahead and talk about 3 things that we're expecting to see, and then do a little score prediction for the most part. I do want to make sure we have enough time to at least go over some of the different draft and mock draft scenarios, especially with Arizona seemingly maybe not locked in, but certainly on track to having a high pick this year. I'll go with the prediction. You go with the prediction. We can maybe both come up with one prediction at least at the end that we'll have, and then we can kind of give our score prediction. My first prediction, and this is kind of me just trying to steal it before I think you would take it, but I think we can agree, would be that for the second week in a row, Greg Dortch leads the Cardinals in number of receptions and number of receiving yards. It feels like that having Michael Wilson out, or anything that gets Dortch on the field when he's produced. Wouldn't shock me if he ends up with 6 catches for 67 yards. And I think that we could see that be passed by Trey McBride, but with the way that the game is going to be played, if the Rams are able to start running the ball on a beat up Cardinals defense that has not really stopped the run all year, Arizona may then have to throw to get back ahead. And I could see that being a case where they're going to have to throw the ball to Greg Dortch, because he's going to be out there and he's so far shown himself to be capable when he's had the opportunity.
Yeah, he's such a good route runner. His route running ability has not been displayed enough, and it's actually that's the fault on all of us as a Cardinals community for not trying to, like, we have asked and we have said, like, why isn't he getting any more snaps? But in order to show why, like, we have to actually like make the plea and say, like, look, this is how good he is. Like, it's not just about like the numbers that we saw, like a separation yards wise that his mom has tweeted out, which, by the way, she's getting involved as well, because that's how sad it is. Like, it's only like, hey, you're only going to get your snaps when somebody else goes down in front of you. Well, he's very talented to be a starter, so it's so underrated, and I take the blame for not trying to display more of that. So I will try to take that challenge on, because I think he is good enough to be a starter long term in the NFL. And you're right, there is a possibility where he is leading it's actually a high possibility he'll be leading the Cardinals receivers in yardage wise, whether Hollywood Brown's in or not. Now, Trey McBride, it's going to be between both of them. And I believe that Trey McBride has a really good game. The offense would actually be working really well in that circumstance. That means that they're really doing what they need to do to be able to attack this Rams defense. So, I mean, we're going to go over score predictions now.
I was going to say, I think that's a good way to put it. I was going to predict another spot, which I think would be Kyler Murray's pass attempt. We've seen so far this year, Kyler's thrown the ball about 30 times a game or so. He threw it 30 in the first game, and then about 32, I think it was, against the 32 times against the Falcons. And what we've looked for as far as his career stats is he throws for about 240 yards, runs for about 30 yards per game. And then depending on the opponent, we've kind of seen that either the passing yards go up, sometimes the rushing yards go up. I think what you want to see is you need to see, and I'm going to predict this, Kyler throws somewhere between 35 to 40 passes, but he still gets over 200 yards. And that's something that he hasn't done as much in the past. A lot of times you would see this passing game where it's like, wow, Kyler threw the ball like 42 times against the Rams, and they only got like 180
Yeah.
yards. What happened? Because they're throwing it so short. I think that this offense is going to at least provide enough time for a bit more yardage for Kyler. And I do think that he is going to come into this game after they were really upset last week. They wanted to win. It's a home game. I don't know if that means that the Cardinals are going to be able to walk away with a win. I think that the game very quickly gets out of hand if Kyler's doing, 40 plus times that he's throwing it. And that happened in the last game. Against the Rams, Josh Dobbs, Cardinals ran the ball 30 times, which is kind of what you want. But 7 of those were by Josh Dobbs, and he threw the ball 41 times. He completed about half of his passes, threw for about 235 yards, which is more than the 200 you're looking for in terms of a bad kind of team. But that was one of those games in which you really saw the game get away from Arizona and then ended up being a blowout 29-6. I should say 26-9. Yep, that's correct. For the Rams against the Cardinals all the way back in week number 6. And that's the thing that I think that you don't want to see. You want to see if you can have Kyler be put into a situation where he's not having to throw the ball. Ideally, you don't want to throw it 30 times a game if you can just run the ball. But I think that if you let him go and throw it 40 to 50 times a game, that's where I would get more concerned about. He would take more hits. He starts running around a lot more. That's something where I think you're going to have to be able to almost protect Kyler from himself in that way. So that's why I'm predicting that he's going to throw a bit more than we've seen in the past, just because it's hard for me to be able to say that, yes, this is going to be a Falcons and a Texas team that's turning the ball over a lot. The defense has played great in forcing those turnovers, but I don't think he's going to be throwing it as much as, say, a team that's getting blown out and having to catch up would be. Do you have another prediction, at least, Marcos, before we kind of hop into our score predictions for the game?
I'm going to predict that like the snap count is going to go, that the under center snap count is going to be higher than it has been. So maybe like 10 times under center, which is it's not a lot, but it would be a lot for someone in Kyler Murray. So it's going to be probably 10 runs from under center and 4 passes from under center. That's my prediction.
Nice. And then the last one I have at least is I think the Rams will have 200 receiving yards with the caveat of I think that Cooper Kupp is not going to get to 100 yards in the game, but I do think that we'll see Tutu Atwell, Puka Nacua, Tyler Higbee, even maybe Kyron Williams being back. That's something that I think that they can make up some of that slack, and that's where I think that it'll be at the end of the day is that we're not going to see this huge breakout game like last time for Cooper Kupp, but I think we will end up seeing just because of, hey, if Jalen Thompson's hurting, if we're going to see Marco Wilson out there, maybe they see more Keitrell Clark, and that's a change. It is a spot where that has been an issue of getting to the passer, getting that pass rush, and of course, being able to stop these wide receivers for lots of teams for the most part. Even last week, Texans were down I believe it was Noah Brown, and you still at least got to see some guys go off in terms of Tank Dell for 150 yards. I think it's going to be a little bit more spread out this time. I am open to being wrong there. Maybe Cooper Kupp has a dominant game, and we're all kind of look at Marco Wilson and just kind of wonder why we're doing the same thing week in and week out. But enough at least with the predictions of what happens in the game. Let's predict the game. The over-under, at least right now, Rams are 2.5-point favorites. That means that they're expecting that the Rams will be able to cover the spread. Would be they kick a field goal and win by 3 points. Cardinals would be then covering the spread if they end up getting within 2 points of the Rams or outright winning the game. The point total also is about 45.5 as it currently stands for the game, which would be about a 24-21, about maybe a 24-22 type of game. That's what Vegas is predicting. I've got it pretty close to that, but Marcos, what is your score prediction for how you see this game going for the Cardinals up against the Los Angeles Rams as they take them on at State Farm Stadium?
I think it's going to be like 27-20 game, and unfortunately, I would have to pick the Rams in this circumstance. I don't want to, but it's one of those situations where you got to show me that you can beat them before I actually start giving you that nod, because they have been so dominant towards the against the Cardinals. It's hard to pick against them.
No, for sure. Yeah, I have this at least as a final score of I've got Rams putting up 27 points, and I have the Cardinals putting up 22. I could see a similar situation to last week's game where Cardinals end up in need of a touchdown versus a field goal. I just think that there's going to be enough of an impact that Aaron Donald makes. If they can force a Stafford turnover, that'd be great. It would not shock me at all, at least though, if we end up talking about a late Cardinals score, it kind of gets them back within 5. So it's like you score maybe a touchdown or kick a field goal in the fourth quarter, but you're then having to go back for that onside kick. So I do have the Rams covering this game and winning. If the Cardinals do end up winning for the most part, I think that you'd be probably looking at a lower scoring game, something like the Cardinals kicking a field goal to win, something like 22 or 23-20. One of those late score, kind of last minute drive types of victories would be what you'd hope for in a Cardinals win. And with that, let's shift into talking about what a lot of fans have already shifted into talking about, which is the NFL draft. And then Marcos, we're going to go ahead and use the Pro Football Focus's mock draft simulator. But most of what people are talking about has been this kind of race to the bottom. So right now, obviously, as far as the draft order is concerned, we have a draft scenario where the Chicago Bears, through the Carolina Panthers, have the number 1 overall pick. Panthers at least have still 1 win on the year. Cardinals had gotten their second. But there are a lot of teams right now that are actually approaching some of kind of the make it or break it type of games. This upcoming week, you've got a team that's picking 5th in the Giants. Last week got a win that pushed them back out of that number 2 overall pick spot. So thanks you to Tommy DeVito for those watching the Tank Bowl. They played the New England Patriots this week. And if you're wanting to really see like some fun as far as for who are 2 of the worst teams in the National Football League, take a look at the offensive rankings for in terms of points per game. You take a look at obviously the top teams being the Dallas Cowboys, the Miami Dolphins, the Niners, and the Ravens. The very bottom, there are your New England Patriots and New York Giants. They are the 2 lowest scoring teams, averaging 14 and 13 points per game. Absolutely atrocious offense going on. New York having a poor season and Daniel Jones season-ending ACL injury. Patriots have just been a mess to the point of where Mac Jones has been benched. It wouldn't shock me if we see Bailey Zappi out there. They cut another quarterback in Will Grier, I believe, earlier today, or Will Grier, however you want to pronounce his name. Wouldn't shock me if they end up putting Mac Jones in or out there, or someone gets hurt. Wouldn't shock me if this ends up being, some sort of like a 13-9 type of win for one team that's able to kind of score a fumble and then get a touchdown. And that's like the only touchdown that's scored the entire game. What that I think though sets up, at least for Marcos, is that means that you're going to get a team either of the New England or of the Giants that's going to be pushed out of that top scenario. If we're picking Cardinals to lose, you're still looking at 2 wins. The Carolina Panthers this week are not projected to be able to get a win. They are really kind of just trying to figure out at least a little bit more, because it's one of those weird spots, at least Marcos, where it reminds me a lot of those early 2019 Cliff Kingsbury Cardinals that started off where I think they were 1-6 to start off with before they rattled off 3 in a row with a strong run game, adjusting the personnel, being able to actually like use a little bit more protection for Kyler Murray. It doesn't feel like this Panthers team has that. They don't have a Christian Kirk or a Larry Fitzgerald to throw to. They've got maybe a Fitz type in Adam Thielen, but their offensive line has really struggled. And it's not that they've been making some serious changes. They changed their offensive coordinator. Now they're switching back their play caller. At this point, it feels like they're playing for their jobs next season. I don't expect that to go much better going up against the Tennessee Titans this upcoming week. Maybe I'm wrong, and then maybe we see a flip-flop between the Panthers and Titans for the most part, but I just don't think that Derrick Henry and DeAndre Hopkins are going to let the Panthers go off and be able to beat them. So that means that we're looking at the Cardinals picking still probably with that number 2 overall pick. Right now, with most teams, when you start that draft, you're at least seeing another quarterback needy team in the Bears picking first, and teams such as the Titans, Washington, and the Falcons, all teams that seem to at least have gotten their wide receivers, for the most part, set. Maybe Tennessee, I would say probably you're questioning that. but there's enough teams, at least in that area, that may be needing a quarterback that you got to wonder if this is a trade or a take spot for the Cardinals. Let's get going. They end up in a unique spot in this simulation with Drake May and not Caleb Williams going number one overall. Marcos, I don't know how much of these quarterbacks you have been able to watch so far this season, but it does feel like there's been a huge late push for Drake May as being the first quarterback taken, even over the likes of a Caleb Williams.
That's funny because that always seems to change. Even going into a year where you think that that quarterback, okay, that guy is going to be taken number one. He's going to be the Tank Bowl champions gift or like trophy because that's the reason why you're trying to tank and whatnot. And it happens often enough that like they start changing because when you see more of the season and see what their strengths are, see what their weaknesses are, see what's going on and whatnot, that could 100% change what the outcome looks as far as like, like who's going to be taking number one overall. I mean, just this past year, there was a flip flop between it was mostly Bryce Young, who was a unanimous number one pick, but there was some, talk about CJ Stroud. And I would have to give it to Thinking Football on picking him as the 1A because they were completely right about his ability to read the entire field. Bryce Young, kind of weird enough, was able to target all parts of the field, but look what's going on with him now. He's in a bad situation. He's looking like a bona fide bust, even if it's not really his fault. But CJ Stroud on the opposite side, we thought the Houston Texans were going to be the worst team in the NFL. That's what we were predicting, quote unquote. So when we made that trade for our first overall pick to have them move up to number 3 to get Will Anderson, we were like, okay, well then that's going to be a top 5 pick. Well, look how it's blown up in our face. Now we only got like one pick in the top 5, and it could always, like I said, it could always change. I'm still eyeballing at this juncture Marvin Harrison Jr. because I'm not done. Obviously, we still have games left to be able to evaluate what Kyler Murray is going to do and how he's going to perform. Yeah. If it's not a situation where Kyler Murray gets injured or he looks just like he's not getting any better from where he was at and you still having the same problems, then you at that point either see enough from him to be able to say, okay, let's get him a beast of a wide receiver, a true alpha to be able to help him be able to ascend the part of his game that he really is good at, which, I mean, Marvin Harrison Jr. will complement that very well. And that's the reason why I keep going for like someone like a Marvin Harrison Jr., because it would be just like giving Joe Burrow his Chase, I forgot what his name was, Jamar Chase.
That'd be Jamar Chase.
So like his Jamar Chase, that would be Marvin Harrison Jr. to a Kyler Murray. Now, whether that's going to happen or not, obviously it's up in the air, but that would be my pick.
Yeah, no, I think that's kind of makes a lot of sense. I think in this scenario, that does bring up an interesting question, which of course is, you're the Arizona Cardinals. Obviously, if Drake May goes at number 1, I do think there's a good chance he could. I mean, he was going to fit that prototypical 6'4" pocket passer, works well in structure. And Caleb has at least had a lot of times where he's made some incredible plays running around, but he and Kyler are pretty similar as far as their background, even with both having Cliff Kingsbury as a head coach. I mean, another guy named Lincoln Riley, I think, may be up in there too. But being able to see, at least, I think it comes down to, with Kyler, it's not necessarily even just the age or the ability. I think one of the things that you look at is when it comes to teams, you talk about, do you need to upgrade the position, which means you need to get better? Do you need to replace the position, which means it's bad, like just get it fully out there? Or do you keep the position? And I think with Kyler Murray, we've seen him. He's come back from injury. He's at least to this far played well enough. He hasn't gotten hurt. There doesn't seem to be any need to go out and replace him right now. So I think then that begs the question, do you just keep Kyler Murray, or do you believe you can upgrade into Caleb Williams? And I think that from what I've seen of looking at the prospects, I think that overall Caleb's arm is probably a bit better. They still have the same arm strength of being able to drive the ball downfield. They can make some of these off platform, it doesn't have to be perfect footwork throws. They also can have some of those tendencies, like we've seen Kyler Murray. He runs backwards against the Falcons and gets out of a sack and makes a play. We've seen Caleb Williams do the same thing. We've also seen them take some sacks in that period of time as well. I think the biggest thing for me in this scenario is you're talking about, is the benefit of moving to a quarterback who I think from a lot of people have wondered, is he going to be mentally better than where Kyler is in this point? Do you want to be able to kind of move to a new quarterback? I'm one of those people who I wouldn't have a problem if they keep Kyler and take Marvin Harrison. I wouldn't have a problem if they move to a different quarterback too, because I think that moving from one quarterback to one who it would probably take another down year, and I think a lot of fans may not like that as much, but the question I'll say is, could this guy, either Drake May or Caleb Williams, could that be your CJ Stroud? Like, could that be the guy who you end up going out and getting? I think it's possible, but I think in this scenario, if you had to say, all right, I'm in a place where I'm picking number 2. You've got the Patriots are picking right here at number 3. They're going to want a quarterback. The Bears are picking at number 4. The team that's most likely going to want to trade up for a quarterback out of any of these, it's got to be a team like the New York Giants. Maybe I could see the Giants though. They may be in the spot where they say, you know what, we don't really need a quarterback as much because we got to sign a veteran like a Jacoby Brissett, go out there. We've got to get Daniel Jones because his contract, that's going to be a hard thing to trade. He's coming off of an ACL. They're kind of in the same spot Arizona was last year. I think the Giants, if they don't get on Marvin Harrison, maybe they'll take a tackle, but I could see them trying to trade back a few spots, get another right tackle a few picks later. I think that the team you'd want to look for to be really interesting would be, could you convince a team like the Falcons to trade up all the way from pick number 8 to pick number 2 to hop the Patriots? Or do you want Marvin Harrison Jr.? And I think I would, maybe not speaking for both of us, but I think if you're talking about wanting to set the Cardinals up for success at the next level and seeing this as your Larry Fitzgerald, I think that you can take a Marvin Harrison Jr., go all run to the bank and be happy. And I think that's what most Cardinals fans would do. But if you're going to say that you've got Caleb Williams and you would end up taking him with this pick, for the most part, he falls there to that second pick. Do you think that that would be a mistake by the Arizona Cardinals, or would there be positives they would take? What would be kind of the general feeling if that's what Arizona did in this situation? Because I would be not shocked by it, but I think it would definitely be a surprise to most people.
Well, you also got to think about what weapons are we surrounding him with as well, because that was the issue with Bryce Young. Now with the Texans, we had that same question, and CJ Stroud, aside from like making names out of certain wide receivers, they also did they did a good job drafting well for his weapons and whatnot. So they're just thinking about mostly just adding to that and adding to that arsenal. Now, if you do get a Caleb Williams, now we can try to get lucky and do the same thing. This is a very deep wide receiver draft where I think they say it is like 1 or 2 rounds deep, where you can get a bona fide alpha in this in this draft. And of course, we have another first rounder. We just don't know where he's going to be, where that like pick is going to be at. So yeah, it's possible to get a Caleb Williams and then get a 1A like wide receiver, but he's not going to be like the Marvin Harrison, where I think it's almost guaranteed that he's going to be like the type of wide receiver that's going to be a first year impact, like a Justin Jefferson or a Jamar Chase. Like not Justin Jefferson, but Jamar Chase. Like he was being touted as the better out of the 2 wide receivers from LSU. And so that's a very good question, as well as like, what do you do with our wide receiver core now? You have a good tight end. You have a up and coming, in my belief, in Michael Wilson. Unfortunately, his injury like kind of is giving credence on why he went in the 3rd round. So hopefully that's not a career like long type of thing. Maybe you extend Hollywood, maybe you don't. Who knows? Because if you draft Caleb, you have to get rid of Kyler. What's Hollywood Brown going to do? Is he going to stay with the team that just got rid of his quarterback? Well, probably not. So those are that question. Or do you just bring in the wide receiver that's going to be the bona fide alpha? Maybe give Kyler Murray another year. Yeah, give Kyler Murray another year with that type of quarterback, because he hasn't. That's my argument. He hasn't had that type of wide receiver with the Keim regime. He hasn't had that like bona fide alpha on the outside. He had DeAndre Hopkins, but DeAndre Hopkins wasn't a take the top off the defense. He's had like 4-3 guys, but they're short. So
it was near the ending of Hopkins' career, because obviously the biggest thing that I remember was we entered 2020, and I believe it was that they went out and got DeAndre Hopkins, and he had a good season for the most part for Arizona. They had, I think it was a little bit of times he was banged up, but 2021, the whole quote from AJ Green was Hopkins doesn't miss games. What does he do? Goes on and misses almost a season's worth of games, going out in week 7 and then having a 6-game suspension, and misses the last 2 games of the 2023 season. And so you went from having a true number 1 wide receiver to not having one. And it was a difficult choice, I think, for the Cardinals to make, because I think after trading for Hopkins, you probably aren't going to take a CD Lamb in the first round. I was one of the people who was a proponent of it, specifically because I just did not have a lot of belief in Andy Isabella and Hakeem Butler, unfortunately, at that point. And I think looking back on it now, you probably could have used Christian Kirk in a better way or moved him, but you'd had to move on from Larry Fitzgerald to do that. So I agree with you in that if you're able to get your quarterback a number 1 top target, you see that impact almost instantly on the field. It's got one of the biggest impacts for any team, because it really does make everything much, much easier for your quarterback and much, much more difficult on a defense when you have a guy like that. Now, I did want to at least go down a little bit of just kind of before, because I think I am going to take Marvin Harrison Jr. here, because even if there are some trade offers to kind of move back with a team like the what is it? Patriots, we see they're kind of willing to stand place and say, hey, Arizona, you go ahead and take Marvin Harrison Jr. If you're going to trade back, it's going to be with another team below us. Maybe the Bears want to offer some draft capital to move up and get Marvin Harrison Jr. If I'm the Cardinals, I probably wouldn't let that happen. But let's take a look at a scenario where the Cardinals do take a quarterback. So here's a little quick mock that I spun up, at least, where you see Caleb goes at 1. And let's say the Cardinals look at Drake May. He's taller. He's a pocket passer. He's at least younger. Let's say if they look at Kyler Murray and say, hey, look, like, we're going to be doing a lot of play action over the middle. And we've seen improvement there, but we've also seen at least that, like, there's been, areas of the age or other questions. And we've got a team that'll trade, a bunch of draft picks for Kyler Murray. Maybe that's a move they make. Let's just go down this hypothetical here, and here's what I think it would look like. So you'd be taking a quarterback at 2, and then I would have the Cardinals then trading. Murray would then go to a team like the Pittsburgh Steelers. It'd be your first rounder this year. It would also be a first round pick next year, and then I had a third round pick as well this year. Because if you do end up in a spot where you're taking a quarterback, you're going to be getting back a haul for Kyler, because there's other teams who are going to look for a quarterback too. Like, you don't think that the Vikings would probably give up a late first round pick to pair Kyler Murray with Justin Jefferson. You don't think that a team like the Saints, for the most part, which for whatever reason they keep bending their draft cap around, a team like at pick 14, like the Raiders, for the most part, who just are basically seeing what a 4th round pick is. I think there will be competition, and the team that seems most ready to kind of go for it, I would think, would be the Steelers, with that elite defense, having pass catchers, and needing to probably at least take a good hard look at Kenny Pickett, because right now their offense has been bad. They fired their offensive coordinator. You plug in a Kyler Murray, and they're like instantly going to be one of the best teams in the AFC. So that's what I had. I got a couple of draft picks at least in addition. And like you said, I was able to still get a wide receiver somewhere in that first or even early second round, along with looking at addressing cornerback, and then another third round pick much later, I think, as well. Maybe it was a 4th round pick, I think was what it went for. Oh, no, it's 2/3 at least there. I did send a 4th round pick back to the Steelers. But in this scenario, like, even if there's the plus and stuff, and I think that the rookie quarterback contract, you're paying a guy $40 million over 5 years versus $40 million a year for Kyler. Let's say that you're comfortable with Kyler. His deal's going to look better in quite a few years. It may look super good as far as being an affordable deal when guys are getting $50 to $60 million. Like Jared Goff may have a contract bigger than Kyler Murray's, for all we know. Let's go ahead and let's take Marvin Harrison Jr. and get to that next draft pick. I think that right now, as far as it goes, that seems to be what the case we've seen for the Cardinals, and there hasn't been a reason to necessarily move on from Kyler Murray. It's been a question of, is that enough of an upgrade? So here we fall at pick 21, and Marcos, we've got our wide receiver already. I don't think that you necessarily should double dip for the most part. Maybe you, because I think we've seen enough from, the likes of Ibuka. He's shown that he'll probably be maybe that slot/outside guy at the next level. I could see him flourishing, but I don't think there's a need to double dip. I think that there's a lot more needs for the Cardinals on the lines, on the cornerback spot, and at the pass rushing position. You could even sell me if you wanted to on a linebacker. Like, I wouldn't be the one who would draft a first round linebacker personally, but I would trust this Cardinals coaching staff with a first round linebacker way more than I would trust the past
Yeah.
Cardinals and Steve Keim taking one. What are your thoughts for the Cardinals with this draft pick? And I'll give you a little surprise that I would have at least after this. Once you're kind of done.
Well, I definitely need to. I need to do more evaluation on defensive line and edge, um, because we do have to start implementing more of that top, like those top picks being more defensive heavy, because we need help at corner. That's I don't think that's even like a question right there. But we also need to have like a bona fide defensive lineman or an edge rusher. So it's going to be between both of those. When it comes to like defensive lineman, who's the top talent at DL? Can we draft them early in the second round? Do we need to draft them at late in the first round? Because if it's not somebody that's going to be special, then it's going to be hard for me to sell me on like, hey, draft them in the later part of the first round, because you could still get a bona fide talent early in the second. Edge
Yeah.
rusher, they start dropping off like flies as soon as the first round or the first two rounds come around. That talent just starts dropping, and I'm still in the belief that like this coaching staff, what they should do is get I mean, Zayvon Collins has been doing fine at edge. He hasn't been blowing out the stat sheet, and he hasn't been doing.
Yeah.
Put him back at inside linebacker. He that's what he was drafted as. He's good at being able to cover running backs and even tight ends, and he can fill in the gaps very well. Put him back at inside linebacker, and then draft yourself that edge rusher opposite side of what I would assume would be Ojolari,
Mm.
who's shown he's shown enough
Yeah.
and on the off defensive line to be the type of guy who could probably get consistent like 10 sacks a year. So that's all you need. You need your bookends on the outside to be disruptors. So it's either you go with the top-notch defensive lineman, and if that guy isn't there, then you draft them in the second round, but get yourself a bona fide edge rusher.
Mhm.
That's what I would do.
Yeah, and I think here's what I would say, and because I completely agree with you. I think that if you're the Cardinals, you look at you've got extra third round picks this year. You may even be trading back at least for the most part from a top 2 or 3 pick if a team is willing to give up a ransom to be able to move all the way up. And you're like, hey, we love Marvin Harrison Jr., but like people have said, we got so many needs. I would then look at trading back up for one of these edge players like a Chop Robinson or a Dallas Turner. We'll see how the medicals turn out for someone like a Latu. The player that I would say if I was going to have a spot of if I was going to pick one guy that I would trade back and still get a top 5 pick, Jerson Newton would be the guy. I think that he is the best defensive tackle in this class. I would prefer getting the guy for Kyler Murray when you have a need at wide receiver, but your need may be greater at the defensive line spot. I think at least that you can get a Marvin Harrison Jr. and then try to move up for a guy. Like if you told me everyone a year ago, hey guys, Cardinals are not going to get Will Anderson, but they're going to get Paris Johnson, they're going to get Marvin Harrison Jr. next year, and they're going to get the other pass rusher at Alabama. I think pretty much every Cardinals fan would sign that immediately and just take that and say, like, oh, yes, please, I'll take that. Thank you. Love you, Will Anderson, but I will take another pass rusher, a left tackle, and the best wide receiver prospect in years. That's what I think you would do. I do think that in this spot here, what I would say, I do think they need an edge rusher. They don't have some of the top guys that are there. I think that as far as the offensive side, you could look at a corner. Cooper DeJean is a cornerback who's very athletic out of um, Iowa. I would look at honestly taking a defensive lineman or a tackle here because I think that this is kind of what people have said. I don't know if you can necessarily build a team around having 2 first round tackles. But I do think that if that's going to be one of the places that you're going to talk about giving identity for the Cardinals, having a strong offensive line, having a strong run game, that would be one way to do it. And there's a good group of tackles this year. I don't think the defensive lineman is as good for the most part, but I do at least like what we've seen, at least from me watching them with the likes of Leonard Taylor and then with Kalen King. I would take Leonard Taylor the third right here on the defensive line because like if Lucky Fotu is your starter, you don't got anyone past that for the most part. If you're in a spot where you can't trade up, that's where I would go. And looking here in the second round, like if you're talking about needing to get an edge rusher, getting a cornerback, getting a offensive lineman, there's at least quite a few guys I think that are here that you can poke through. And I think the biggest one that stands out to me is JT Tuamalo, who had a good sack, I believe, today. Maybe it was a third down stop against Michigan. You can get an edge rusher then at least the top and pick 34. Maybe you trade back from here, second year in a row, like Monty Austin for it. What do you feel like would be the best case scenario here for the Arizona Cardinals top of round two?
I'm looking at that edge rusher, but the just like I mentioned, the talent does drop off quite a bit afterwards. But when it comes to like corner, maybe that would be the case that I would go with because we do need to get like our corner solidified as well. So it's a tough call because you need both,
Yeah.
unfortunately. So which one drops off more? Is it corner or is it edge? They both pretty much drop off.
Right.
Like the talent just starts becoming like bare. So
Yeah.
it's a tough call to be
Yeah.
honest with you. I don't know.
You got a 6 foot corner and you got your 270 pound 6'4" guy that fits kind of more of a 4-3 style. I think what I would at least look at is if you're going to build your identity as the Cardinals and with Jonathan Gannon, I would think you would want to build it around the front. What we saw them do with the Eagles was they basically drafted a Jordan Davis after drafting another impact player from the Georgia Bulldogs. They brought in a Nolan Smith who's been injured, but I think that building that strong front, being able to stop the run, get pressure on the quarterback, I think we'll go with the edge rusher here. And then, of course, we know the Cardinals, they have only one second round pick. They will be then waiting at least until round 3. I could see this being another trade up spot if they wanted to get back in. I personally would trade that third to get the round 1 player a little bit higher. But, when we enter then into the third round, Marcos, we've got a couple of different spots here. We've got another defensive lineman. You've got a couple of running backs who are starting to pop up, and you've got another linebacker as well as maybe some less heralded positions, but guys who I think at least right now are kind of underrated in Luke Lachey, Brian Thomas Jr., and Tyler Guyton out of Oklahoma, which of course was the school that Kyler Murray, I should say, declared for the NFL draft from. He has a statue there, but I don't know if he graduated.
That's like the reason why I'm not even looking at linebacker in this situation scenario because I'm treating like Zaven Collins being moved back to linebacker as like
Okay.
adding a linebacker into our defense and whatnot. This is going to be kind of tough, but I think you'd have to go interior offensive lineman because we need to start trying to get more talent and hit that position with numbers because it's been, I mean, that inside has been like it hasn't been horrible in the past years, but it's just we need to get more we need to get it more solidified because of the fact that like that interior push like is what helps Kyler Murray see more of the field vision wise. Then if those guys are getting beat up like constantly getting pushed back like centers and guards, it's not going to be feasible for Kyler Murray to be able to be successful when that interior pressure keeps coming towards him because that's what makes him bail out of the pocket. So I would probably
It's
look
tough
for
because
interior.
they don't really have as much of a guy at least that fits some of that, and that's kind of where I think I agree with in terms of drafting for need, in terms of drafting for talent. No one's really offering a trade to get up to this position. I would probably lean the linebacker here and hope that you could maybe with a day 2 talent be able to find someone who's there. But I think if there's anything you'd want to look for the most part, I do wonder if the tackles might be able to move to the interior. It'd be interesting, or either way, you kind of need like at some point to recognize if you're going to upgrade from DJ Humphries, and the way to do that may just be by sliding Paris Johnson over to that side. You've got a space where you could then probably have a need for tackle, maybe pushing him inside. The hard part is this is not a heavy offensive line draft for the interior. There's another player I think that we'll see up in a little bit that maybe one of those guys the Cardinals could have some interest in, but in a spot like this, I would probably say that you could either look at the you could also look at potentially, and this is one of the areas I think too, is you could also look at the halfback spot. So James Conner, he's not 30 yet. He is getting up there in age for the most part. I do think that in this spot, I'd probably lean a Trey Benson because one of the ways that you can protect Kyler is not just with offensive linemen, but having a strong run game. And we saw what this team looked like when James Conner was off of the team. It's like if it wasn't Amari DiMercato, they just weren't running anywhere. So I would probably take Trey Benson in this spot. He's a big back, very similar measurables at 6'1", 223 to James Conner. Is pretty young. I would probably lean toward drafting him unless you feel like there's another player on this list that pops out to you more.
I like that pick at halfback. I mean, we do need to get it's kind of weird because like we also need the shifty type of back, but
Mhm.
we've been successful with these big backs. Like
Yeah.
James Conner isn't like a small guy. He's a big guy. Like so for some reason running the type of run scheme that we're and I brought this up before because that would be the case with
Yeah.
Pittsburgh when he was playing with them. He was seeing a lot of under center formation. So we're gonna continue on with the scheme. Yeah, why not? Like that's a good pick for
I think he's a
halfback.
better and I think he's a better fit than a Blake Corum, who is also a big back, but just I've seen a lot more explosiveness as far as with Trey Benson. Michigan is just kind of a studly team this year anyway. Now you get another pick just a few spots later for the most part. And here's kind of where I think now this is where I'd say you could either look at another defensive lineman because again, like Cardinals, they're just been depleted on the defensive line. We've gotten one defensive lineman, we've gotten an edge rusher. I would be interested to find out. Do you feel like this would be the spot to look for a linebacker? Maybe you'd look at another time you could look for the tackle. The one spot that I think would be really interesting here, could you take another tight end at the top of round three? And normally I would say, I mean, you got Trey McBride, you're going to feature him. But with how Iowa tight ends have produced the last few years, and I think maybe Lachey could end up going in the second round. Do you feel like this Cardinals team, which uses mostly 12 personnel, is it fine with just getting a Jeff Swaim type for the most part, or could they maybe invest, make it a strength? What are some of your thoughts here on what the best options are for? And then we can also look at a potential trade back all the way down to pick 89 with the Dallas Cowboys here too.
I I don't know. I was looking at that Jeremiah Trotter Jr. Like
Mm,
I need to see his measurables because I
yeah.
have not heard
He
enough from this
is
guy.
pretty fun because he's that lighter, more athletic, speedy linebacker, which is obviously different from the Zaven Collins type for the most part. I think that he's one of those players, if you're going to end up keeping the 3-4 type of defense, he fits for me, I think, more as like a 4-3, maybe will or playmaking linebacker. He does come from a school that has a lot of decent linebackers in the NFL. Weirdly enough, Isaiah Simmons just has
Isaiah
not been one
Simmons.
of them. But you're getting him in the third round this time. I think that's probably a good enough spot because Kaiser White, he's out for the season. He was on a 1 year, I think it was a 1 year deal, or if it was, there was a option for next year, unless I'm mistaken. I'm gonna take a look at that real quick. It's 2 years, 10 million. That's right. So Kaiser will be back next season. So you probably have your starter. I think if you can add the rookie, you've already got another guy that showed up in Chris Barnes pretty well this year. I would say that that's a good spot to go ahead and draft the inside linebacker. I would probably pick that talent over trading back to 86 because we've got another third round pick here at the Cardinals at 85. And to me, this one is honestly, this one I think is pretty easy. I think there's two players that I'm looking at here. One of them would be Kalen Carson, who at least is going to be a 6 foot, 200 pound, large type corner. That's going to fit the outside corner mold for most teams pretty well. The other is a Christian Haynes, who I find myself using a lot of mock drafts a lot. He's a little bit smaller than some guards at 6'2, which I think honestly fits Kyler Murray. He's a straight 315 pounder. He's not your overly heavy 330 pound road grader, but he's not your 300 pound smaller guy that you can maybe hide at center. I think to me, either of those picks I think are pretty fine. It then just depends on, did you get a corner during free agency? Did you get a left guard during free agency? Which one would you lean here if you're having to make a pick today between the cornerback or the guard, Marcos?
So I'll make a little bit of a what is it called again? Like I forgot what the word is. So the reason why I wanted Jeremiah Trotter Jr. is because I wanted to get two juniors that had former
Ah,
fathers in the NFL. So you
there
have
you go.
Marvin Harrison and Jeremiah Trotter. So that's a little
Nice.
bit of like a little. But anyways, I think I was looking more towards the guard, mostly because I do think they have to try to address corner in the like through free agency,
Mhm.
and the reason why is because we have enough young talent there that we don't need to just keep
Yeah.
pressing with that young talent, even if like it is a need for cornerback. If we didn't draft them early in the draft, like having him as a project in the third round, I just don't feel like that's going to be a smart decision to just keep trying to get like cornerbacks that we're not 100% sure on. Even though
Yeah.
Kalen Carson is very talented, could fit that mold, we need to start flooding that interior offensive line position. So I'd probably go with Christian Haynes, and he does look pretty good at possibly as a center, like
Yeah,
measurable
I
wise.
Yeah, and here's what I think also too. Cedric Van Pran is a guy who's the Georgian center. I know that he's projected around fourth round for a lot of mock drafts. We usually see the guys who are like the top centers that we project for round one. A lot of times we'll go round two because teams have drafted centers pretty high, and then it's a first round bust, unfortunately, for a lot of teams. I think I also take the guard here because, like we've said, the emergence that we've seen from Garrett Williams playing well these first few weeks that he's been back, I think that means that you can go the veteran, like you said, signing a free agent route, have Garrett Williams be able to get some more snaps, and then be able to kind of add some investments. Maybe it's round three, maybe later, maybe some of it is just keeping and seeing what you have with Keitrell Clark and Garrett Williams for this next year. But I think that being able to at least have depth of the guard spot, and we'll see. Obviously, the Cardinals do have a draft pick that's coming back from last year, who tore his ACL this year, and I believe it was a fourth round draft pick, unless I'm mistaken, out of UCLA, and that was John Gaines the second. That's one of the spots where I think that we've seen with their left guard position, they need a starter. If they're not going to sign it and use that money toward a corner, maybe Gaines could plug in. I would at least still get another offensive line guy in because at some point you're going to have to move on from Will Hernandez. You're also looking at potentially either having to keep your center for another year. Maybe this is a long-term center option. I agree with you that we should take that Christian Haynes. All right, now we're getting near the end of the third round. We're just going to go through four today. So now we're in a place where I think you're seeing Cardinals. There's a safety, obviously it's there, another halfback, another wide receiver. I think that to me in this spot here, what I kind of feel like as far as with Arizona is this is probably the territory we're going to start to say, hey, is this a top 120 guy, someone who's fallen, who's a much more talented prospect? And to me, there's one player who does stick out in that regard, and it'd be Javon Bullard. Good safety at Georgia. He's got enough as far as with his adequate size. He's not like an undersized Buda Baker or a Honey Badger for the most part, as far as for that size. I think that this would be kind of your spot of looking at saying, hey, can we get a guy who maybe falls to us in a later round who's a little bit more talented? Maybe he should be a round two safety. He's there on the board. And I think that that would be one of the spots that could also help your secondary because you would have a future past Buda and Jalen Thompson. And if either of those guys were to get hurt, you're not having to get free agent guys off the street to be there at the safety position. Now, what are your thoughts at least on that, Marcos?
Yeah, I agree with you. I was looking at the same pick, Javon Bullard. Being that he's like a third rounder. Yep, I liked his size. That's what we have basically working for us at safety anyway. Why not throw another guy that's dependable in that round? I mean, in that draft.
Absolutely. And then with the last draft pick that we have with Arizona, so let's see. Right now, what we've had is, let's see what we have underneath the outcome. We've got a couple of interesting players here. There's another receiver. There's a halfback in Braylon Allen, who is like, again, another one of those big backs. He's 6'2", 245, which is interesting. So we'll see at least as far as how he turns out because I don't think he's necessarily like Derrick Henry, but he's probably the closest thing that college football has as far as just being a huge freak at that size. You've got a center in Drake Nugent. I believe the player that I would be looking at here, if he fell that far, would have been the likes of a Roman Wilson. I think that you would be able to look at being able to at least say that you're probably not going to be looking at Rondale Moore next year. And with Greg Dortch, I think I'd love to give him more slot snaps, but having someone who can compete with him would probably be a good fit for you there. You still have to rebuild some of the trenches, obviously, but looking at some of these different places, Marcos, it kind of does feel like, at least as far as the strength of this draft, I would say that's probably pretty easy to say that you could look at either adding another center or, if you wanted to, it'd be really interesting to see if you would add a mid-round tight end in this spot for the most part, given that I think you're probably not going to take a Trey McBride off of the field, but there's some tight ends that are popping up. What are some of your thoughts here as we kind of make our last pick of the day?
I was going to go with interior. Maybe, yeah, we should go with the center. That way we can have at least that position. Like I said, I'm for like the flooding the position of interior linemen to try to see what what you can have as a pipeline to develop them, to not have to rush them out on the field too soon, to get them, rolling and whatnot. Because then when you lose a guard or you lose a tackle or you lose a center, well, especially in that middle part, that middle part of the offensive line, you've had these players that have been developing behind them, picking up the offense, learning how to do a proper technique when it comes to blocking
Sure.
defensive linemen and whatnot. So you're not rushing them out there, so they're out there either getting exposed. You're preparing them, you're cooking them, and then when they're ready to take over, they're not like bare bones, like, oh, this is just a rookie being thrown out there into the wolves.
Absolutely. Awesome. All right. Well, that will be it, at least for the most part. I guess you could say that we are starving for Marvin in this mock draft. Let me see if I can get at least, I'm just going to go ahead and take two other players just to kind of finish it out so we can take a look at the entirety of the Cardinals draft here. We should be just getting to the end. But yeah, so the first player obviously was Marvin Harrison Jr. was selected. We then were able to at least see the Cardinals. We wanted to probably trade up, get another edge rusher, was I think what we had looked for the most part. And there's DJ Ugalele. That would be an interesting selection as far as backup to be able to push your current backup there. But the next pick, at least that we were able to make on the defensive line side, was going to be Leonard Taylor the third, which of course everyone knows who Leonard Taylor is. You also have JT Tuimoloau, who gives you essentially, so now you've got the pass catcher for Kyler. You've got two guys that can get after the passer. So you got your bookend pass rushers along with an interior guy. That's going to help, I think, with you getting pushed around. You're also able to get back with a halfback and then being able to address linebacker. We waited a bit on corner. I think that I agree with you. The Cardinals would want to pay someone, and then we kind of wrap it up with a couple interior offensive line picks, a safety for value. And then, of course, we finish with our final pick being Drake Nugent, the center out of Michigan. That will wrap it up for us today. This has been the Redbird Reboot podcast. I'm Blake Murphy. And Marcos, if you want to let all of our listeners know where they can find you and your content as we root for the Cardinals against a Rams opponent this week that just feels like you're kind of looking at tale of two teams and you're hoping the Cardinals can come out and play maybe their best game of the season to get that win.
Well, as usual, you guys know where to find me on X or Twitter at Pancake Soul, and also articles on AZ Sports Underground. So I hope you guys have a great day.
Excellent. Make sure you're following our podcast at Redbird Reboot. You can always find our content at Revenge of the Birds as well for the podcast. Thanks so much for tuning in. This has been the Redbird Reboot. It's time for us to log off.